All right, so man, we're gonna do. I guess we don't have a name for this, right? Should we just call it Keith and Ray's Dutch Rudder horror podcast?
Reach Around podcast.
Yeah, so it's basically just our test podcast of like. So basically, I guess this is just kind of for now. It's like a podcast with no real home. Like in the future, this podcast will be cool because if we start doing like commentaries for movies and whatever, and like this can be our episode 0. But that's like in the future. So now it's just like a weird test, like just a podcast for no reason. Is this your first podcast?
This is my very first podcast, aside from the little sort of thing we did when we went to see Spider-Man, which...
oh, shit, yeah. That was before podcasting. That was like year 2000.
Yeah, like 2001, 2002.
Yeah, that's one of those weird things that like the old movie review thing I used to do. That was like weird because like podcasting didn't start till like 2004 or 5. So like years before that, we were doing shitty podcasts.
I only got into podcasts, like listening to podcasts, like last winter. So like less than a year, and I'm like all about them now. Like I listen to them all the time. But that was definitely cool back then. Having your voice or a transcript of something you've done on the internet.
And it was like impossible back then. It was like I had a little what did you even call it? Like a dictaphone. That was just like the little tape that you record, like that you'd buy at Radio Shack to like take your office notes. And then I had to feed that into a computer, and then I had to upload it to Angel Fire. It's fucking bullshit. So I guess basically what this is about is that we're working on a book that someday will be a super famous book.
Maybe not super famous per se, but I mean, at least we'll have something where we can go, here, we aren't total fuck-ups. Look at this.
And like when you look at like, you've got like a bunch of horror movie books, or just when you go to like Barnes & Noble or whatever, chapters, like there are just tons of like, just here's a book about horror shit, and it's like whatever, or any kind of movies. And it's like, yeah, why not us? We could write one. Why the fuck not?
Absolutely. I mean, I stumble around places like BMV or, especially BMV, because BMV at Bloor and Spadina has such an amazing selection of like books about every type of movie, not just horror movies, but definitely have a preference, obviously.
Yeah, so you sent me a little message, because I mean, we've known each other for fucking ever. I think I was in like the 6th grade when I met you, probably.
Yeah, you were, I think, 12, and I was like 13 or 14 or something like that.
Yeah, because I met our friend Terry first, because me and him were the only 2 people in our fucking maritime Canadian city that had a Sega Master System. And then I think through him is how I met you.
Yeah, and then you guys get the Genesis like the same year and everything. So, I mean, just kind of, we met that way. And, of course, we all just kind of hung out and had sleepovers and played video games and watched horror movies and shit.
Yeah, so that's when you like just texted me where you're like, hey, I'm going to write a book about horror movies. You want to write some shit for it? And I was like, that's like so awesome, because that is what we did, like especially in the 80s, in the VHS era. Like it was just cool. It was like now obviously things are better that you can just get whatever you want on the internet, but it was neat back then because like you'd get these weird fucked up movies and it's like, where did this even come from? Like maybe somebody's uncle rented it and just never returned it or something. Like,
yeah, I mean, I came through and came across some movies because this guy I used to hang out with ended up moving to like St. Andrews, and they all went to bed one night, and I was like, whatever, I'm staying up until like 6 a.m, and I was looking through their batch of VHS tapes, and they had recorded from like the movie network, like Rawhead Rex and Blue Velvet and stuff like that. So I stayed up and watched Rawhead Rex, and I was like, this giant demon thing ripped this person's throat out and then took a gigantic piss on them.
Yeah, that's Clive Barker, right? I never saw that movie.
It's pretty terrible. It's a terrible movie. But at the time, you're like, there's boobs, there's violence. It's great. No brainer.
I was going to say, too, like the movie network. Like, I mean, again, nowadays, it's just so easy to get anything. But that was mind-blowing back then. Like, I know Terry had it on and off. I never had it. So I remember going to his house, and we'd just turn it on. And I remember the first time I saw heavy metal. I'd never fucking heard of it. And it's just like cartoon fucking boobs and swords. And I was just like, this is the best goddamn thing I've ever seen in my life. So we put in a tape, but we missed the first like 20 minutes. So for years, I had a copy of heavy metal without the first 20 minutes.
That was Movie Picks you would have caught.
Oh, yeah, I think you're right.
Because there was the movie network, and then which had like movies that were, the way it used to work was a movie would be out in theaters. A year later, it would come out for rental only on VHS. And then 6 months after that, it would go out to be able to be bought. But it was very expensive, even more than Blu-ray and DVD. It was like $40 for a movie at the time for a VHS copy. And then a year to a year and a half after that, it would hit the movie network. And, you know, Movie Picks was like movies that were like 20 years old or something like that.
Yeah, that was like, I mean, you were just saying earlier tonight about how like the new Chucky movie is out on Blu-ray the same day as Netflix, and even on theaters sometimes, like it'll be the theater the same time as on demand, and just weird shit. Where back then it was like if you didn't see a movie in the theater, you were fucked for a long time. Like it was like important to see it because it wasn't coming out forever.
That's true, except for the movie network had this weird little experiment they were doing for I think they did it for a year, and you could call in and you could vote for one of 4 movies that would be this movie would be showing that Friday night, so you had the whole week to vote on it, and these were movies that were still in theaters and you could vote on it. And that's how I caught Blind Fury with Rutger Hauer, and it was such a shitty movie, but I voted for that and it won, so I was happy with it.
Like I gotta watch it. And yeah, all that stuff, it does feel in a way it's like we're talking about a different time when it was just us as kids. It didn't seem that long ago, but like, yeah, like calling in to vote for shit, like, I mean, this will show how Canadian we are, but Much Music used to have Combat de Clip. So I mean, that's like MTV with, I don't even know if they had a show like this, but where you'd call in to vote for a song. And I would do it sometimes because I'm like, you know, I don't even care about Our Lady Peace that much, but they have to win against this shitty band that I hate. So I'll pay 99 cents to call up and vote or whatever.
And they also had the weekly show, RSVP, and you could like call them. Yeah, I think the only way was to call them, actually. You could call them and make a request for a video, and it always boggled my mind how many stupid assholes would call and vote for a video, or to request a video rather, that was already getting steady airplay like 10, 15 times a day. And they're like, oh, I have to see this new TLC video again.
That's what was weird too, is like it really was like a battle in especially the early half of the 90s, where, because it was all mixed together. So it's like not only was there like Soundgarden or whatever, but it was Soundgarden versus Mariah Carey. So it was double important that whatever we were listening to was like, has to beat this thing.
The best week ever, honestly, that I remember just off the top of my head was one week they had Dennis Leary's Asshole versus Nine Inch Nails' Closer. And it was such a hard decision at the time because I wanted to hear someone say asshole a bunch on TV, but I also wanted to see Nine Inch Nails because Nine Inch Nails.
It must have been shitty too for both sides, because like for us it was like, yeah, we're breaking into the mainstream, and like Tool or whatever, like just bands we like are actually on TV. But if you did just want to see TLC or Mariah Carey, you're like, what the fuck is all this weird garbage that I have to watch now? Like, but it was cool. Like I feel in some ways like now with the internet, the way everything is so open and just information is all available, it's weird because it's obviously better, but I miss it when it was harder. Like everything seemed more important back then.
The hunt was also fun. Like around us, we had Log Home Video, which was the one I frequented the most because they didn't give a shit and they let me rent whatever I wanted short of porn. Right. And then there was National Video, where they were snooty and they wouldn't let you rent anything at all unless your parents rented it for you, basically. And there was like that little convenience store whose name I won't say because it's really racially insensitive. But Log Home Video was great, and I would go there and I would spend like a couple hours, even though it was the size of like, you know, my living room, and pick things.
Yeah, I remember just my like clearest memory back then is, I don't know how old I was, but not old enough to rent porn, but they had like, also that was like a thing that it kind of doesn't exist anymore either so much, but just dumb shit like Bikini Summer 2 or whatever, like movies that were just about boobs but they weren't full on porn. I guess they had that too, like in the like drive-in times, but they still existed for VHS. Anyway, I just remember it was like this, me and my cousin was visiting town, and we were like looking at this box of this movie that was like, oh man, this is like Bikini Car Wash, whatever. I wonder if they'll let us rent it. Of course they let us rent it. It was Log Home. Who gives a shit? Like, they're just like, yeah, I don't care. Do you have $3? It's yours.
But they were, I mean, it depended on the person, because with me, I lucked out because, I mean, where I grew up, I mean, you and I know that it was kind of a crappy place and, you know, had a bad reputation. Log Home didn't let people from my street go in and rent unless they were over 18, period. And because all we did was go in and try and steal pop and popcorn and chips and stuff like that they had there, trading cards, whatever. But one day they needed a babysitter really bad, and I kind of wormed my way into the point where they would let me rent anyway. So I babysat this kid, and from that point on, all of my rentals were free because no one else would put up with this kid, and I babysat him like 5 times. So all my rentals were free. I rented like Super Nintendos for nothing with games and, you know, VHS movies, and they just didn't care what I watched.
That really was too. Like, yeah, I think that was the difference with Log Home and National Video. Like, because, yeah, Log Home, we kind of knew the people and whatever. Where National Video, I never really knew anyone who worked there. It seemed more official. And I remember why I got locked out of there was because we rented like the G.I. Joe cartoon movie and never returned it. And I think someone in the neighborhood just stole it or whatever. But it was on our rental thing, and they just never, I mean, obviously I didn't want to pay for it. It's like $50. And so they just never let me rent ever again. And it's like, oh, Log Home would have got over it. You know, they would have let me rent some shit again, I'm sure.
I mean, it just reminds me of such a better time where you could go out and take the time to figure out what you're going to do that evening. And, you know, you didn't have to like rely on social media or, you know, a quick text message to go, hey, you want to hang out? Because either you got a hold of the person by phone or you rented Embrace of the Vampire with Alyssa Milano because you knew she gets naked and leses out and it was a good jerk-off movie without being porn.
Yeah. I remember too, like, just fucking... what was the name of that porn store on the south side? You worked there for a while, right?
Excitement Video.
Yeah, that was it. So that was another example of like pre-internet stuff. I remember there was this one porn chick named Devin, which is funny because our neighborhood was called Devin, but I thought Devin was the greatest. And I was like, I got to see some of these Devin movies. I was of age at this point, but the only place that had the tapes was Excitement Video. So I had to go to the south side. I opened up an account just to rent like 3 movies with this one chick. It was weird how much I was into this one chick. But when I gave the phone number, they're like, oh yeah, there's already an account with that number. And I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely my dad. Because he's a super porn fiend. So they're just like, that's fine. We'll just put like an X after to show this is a separate account. But I was like, what a little moment of father-son bonding that we both have porn accounts at Excitement Video.
Your dad definitely enlightened a lot of us without even knowing. Like, he probably still doesn't know. Devin, by the way, married the singer for Korn.
No way.
Yeah, they're still married. They've been married for like 10 years.
Wow.
Or more.
That's weird because like I still kind of keep up with Korn albums for some goddamn reason. I didn't know that.
The last album was terrible. It was like a 45-minute long song, but they were really good live. Like, saw them a year ago. They were great.
Yeah, and I mean, after a band is around that long, it's all relative because like 3 albums back was the dubstep album. So, I mean, anything's better than that. You know?
I didn't hear that one.
Yeah, it was like, it honestly was dubstep Korn. It fucking, what's his name? Skrillex wrote like 3 of the songs. It was really bad. So, I mean, yeah, the last Korn wasn't great, but it wasn't that.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, too, last time I was home, my mom never throws anything away, so I was just going through stuff and finding weird old shit, and I found a VHS case from something called Lips Video from, like, St. John that was obviously, like, a porn rental place. It's like getting those little tastes of the past of, like, my dad was so into porn. He was driving an hour or so away to go to St. John just to see what porn they had, and then, he obviously just never returned that one.
That's what I was going to go back to, actually, your dad, because I remember it was about a year or so after we started hanging out, and we were at your place, and your dad's room was slightly open, and we went in there for whatever reason, and like, your mom and dad had separate rooms, so I mean, it was odd. But anyway, your dad had this gigantic metal sailor's trunk, and it was stogged so much that it could barely close, and it was full of like hardcore porn, which at the time was rare and expensive because they didn't show penetration, they didn't show like, you know, the money shot or anything like that in porn back then, unless you paid 75, 80 bucks, you know, to have it imported.
Yeah, it was crazy too, right? Yeah, because those things, they'd be like from whatever, Eastern Europe or Germany or something, and they wouldn't be that big. It's like basically $1 a page. It's like $80 for like an 80-page like weird glossy porn. It's just like, fuck, dude.
I remember them, and actually I stole the issue of Playboy from my birth month and year from your dad, and I don't remember whatever happened to it, and I never thought I would see another one again, but I found one at BMV and I've got it framed now. Nice. And I paid like $3.50 or $4 for it, and it was well worth it. But you know, when I saw it I was like, I remember stealing that was great, you know.
Yeah, it was because it was like this huge steamer trunk, and it technically had a lock, but if you just like bent a tine on a fork, it was real easy to open. and that's one thing I was always like, I could never tell if he knew or not. Like, I always kind of had a sense that he's just like, yeah, whatever, let the kids look at porn, who cares? But maybe he was just sort of just so oblivious because he's always high all the time and had so much porn that maybe he had no idea that we were stealing all his porn. I don't know.
He either cared or he didn't. I mean, either way, he didn't say anything, so... Yeah. But, I mean, back to horror movies. I mean, you know... Porn's great. I mean, I don't watch it as much anymore. It just seems like the same shit, different pile. But you know,
well, to kind of tie the two things together a bit, I guess that's, I think, kind of the sign that things were starting to change. Like, obviously, Blockbuster, every town has the same story. Like, they got a Blockbuster, and you know, small video stores had a harder time. But Log Home Video in particular, it had that one little room with like those Western like saloon doors.
Yeah.
That had the little porn closet, and I never went in there because I was still too young. But by the time I was of age, they had built like a wall and made a separate room full of porn. And then that room got bigger and took over even more of the store. And then they moved to the other location, but I had moved away by then. And then they were gone.
I never saw their second location. I mean, I know it was in that...
like the St. Mary's supermarket area, I think?
Yeah, it was in there. And I saw it and I was like, fuck, I should go in there. Because they would remember me and I would get free rentals.
Right.
But then I was like, you know what, I'm a dirty pirate. And I just downloaded everything anyway at that point.
And really, too, for that while that Blockbuster was around, I mean, it's shocking how fast Blockbuster disappeared, but they really weren't that bad. I rented some fucked up shit from Blockbuster. Like, they would have some weird-ass, like, horror movies and stuff that you wouldn't expect Blockbuster to have.
Well, the same thing kind of happened to me with Blockbuster that happened to you in regards to, what was that movie that you...
G.I. Joe.
The G.I. Joe movie with National Video, yeah. I rented the shittiest movie called The Pest with John Leguizamo. And I don't know why, but I really liked the first, like, 20 minutes of that movie. So I rented it. I opened my account, and they give you a free movie when you open an account, or they would give you a free movie when you did that. And this is the movie I chose wisely, and I took it and I watched it, and I kept it for like 3 weeks, and I brought it back, and they're like, oh, you owe us like $35. I'm like, fuck you, I'm never renting here again.
See, basically, you just fucked it immediately with The Pest. I love that. Just like, I guess if you're going to go down, like, go down big time.
Go down over something stupid, you know.
But yeah, I remember, like, I saw, like, there's this weird movie called Redneck Zombies from, like, the late 80s. It was a trauma movie, and me and Matt rented it from Blockbuster. And, yeah, I don't know, I was surprised by Blockbuster. Like, they really weren't so bad. But I guess they were in the sense that they ran everyone else out of business, and then they went out of business.
Yeah, I mean, the mom and pop thing is where it's at, though, because I mean, they knew where their audience was, whereas Blockbuster would get, like, you know, 20 copies of whatever is new and big and bad. Log Home Video would get older horror movies or a different selection of horror movies. They would ramp it up a little bit in the sections that they made money off of, as opposed to try and get it. You know, they didn't get 20 copies of Terminator 2. They got like 2 copies, and if you got one, you were really fucking lucky.
Yeah, and it was neat too, just to not know about shit, like just to look at the boxes and try to figure out like what this shit was. And for some reason, the one that always comes back to me for some reason is that Jamie Lee Curtis movie Prom Night. I don't know why, because it wasn't great or anything, but I just remember I rented it from Log Home because I'm kind of like, I know what this is going to be. It's just going to be a kind of half-assed horror movie, but fuck it. Why not?
It had a great case, though.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Slashback Video?
No.
It's in California, I believe. I heard about it on the Blumhouse .com podcast called Shockwaves, and basically one of the guys who runs this podcast teamed up with someone else, and they have a museum that's only open until I think the end of Halloween, and it's all horror movie VHS cases. So the VHS tape is in them, obviously, but no one's allowed to touch them. So on Sundays, what they do is they flip them over so you can see the backs. But the rest of the week, you can go in, and I think you pay a fee or something like that, and you pay it once, then you have kind of a card, and you can go visit it again. But you can look at all these cases of horror movies from pretty much every decade, and it's like, not only what's popular, but it's like, imported stuff or stuff that kind of flew under the radar or something you might not have heard of. And they get like some of the cases I've seen in pictures, I was like, I've seen that movie like a ton of times, but I've never seen that case. So it's very interesting.
That is cool. I love stuff like that too. Like, normal museums about fancy shit, I just don't care. But like, I was at like a skateboard museum once, and I thought it was awesome. Like, so that sounds great. Like, yeah, shit like that is just awesome. I remember I read this book too about those early days of VHS, where it was like so interesting about how basically there was like shelf space that needed to be filled, and there was that little period around like Evil Dead 1 time when like anyone could make a movie. Like, you just like you could basically make your money back before the movie was even done, just because the pre-orders from video stores were just like enough, because they just needed to fill the space on the racks. And it only lasted like 2 years, but that was like a great time when tons of like Reanimator and shit, like that's when all that stuff happened, and it's just cool.
Yeah, Reanimator is really cool. I kind of found that one by mistake. Like, I'd seen the case for it a bunch of times when we were kids, and I didn't pick it up. I don't know why. Maybe I just kind of assumed it was something that was a little too not what I was looking for, I guess. Like, maybe too mature, not quite a horror movie, or a horror movie for like super smart people, and I just wanted to see boobs and gore. Like, I didn't care about anything else. So
little did you know, though, the Reanimator has plenty of that.
It's got everything. It's great. So it flew under the radar for a long time, and I picked up a copy on Blu-ray a few years ago. Oh no, I watched it on Netflix. I'm like, how have I not seen this before? This is fucking amazing. So I bought a copy the first chance I got, and I think I paid, I don't know, $20 for it, and it's worth $20, like easy $20.
Yeah, I felt the exact same way, because I only watched it. I had always heard about it, but I only watched it when you mentioned it. And yeah, it's like that was like the randomness of movies back then. Like we could have seen it, just as likely as that we didn't see it, but it seems so weird that we never did. Like, that would have been the perfect movie for us when we were kids, and we just didn't happen to pick it up.
It's just like Frankenhooker. I wanted to see Frankenhooker so bad when it came out on VHS. I mean, it had a really awesome box, and it had this button that you push, and when you push it, like, her eyes light up or something lights up, and a girl's voice says, "Want a date?" Like, I thought that was great. But National Video had it and wouldn't rent it to me, and Log Home didn't get it. So I still to this day have not seen Frankenhooker.
Isn't it weird too? Like, I'm sure most of the people in our town, if they have any memories of National Video at all, they're just totally normal memories because they just rented movies and whatever. Where to us, that place was like Fort Knox. Like, they were such dicks. It was like everything was blocked out, and just like,
they didn't have a great horror selection, but the horror movies they had were, I would say, half the ones that they had, Log Home Video didn't have. So they were weird under the radar things that we that we ended up missing.
That's one thing too, is like that. I mean, I feel like it's one of these things that it's hard. This is where I feel like I'm talking about like a time travel, time warp, different time. That I'm sure kids now, they could never quite know what it's like, because now you can go on IMDb and Wikipedia, you can just know everything right away. Where I remember when I was in like 6th grade, me and this kid Jerry that I knew, we just went to the convenience store and just did whatever their little shelf of dumb movies. And we rented Evil Dead 2. But I didn't even register really what the name was. It's like, let's just rent a movie and watch it. And we watched it. And it had that ending where he time travels back in time. And I was like, I felt ripped off. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck just happened. That's not an ending to a movie. Like, what the fuck? And then years later, my aunt rented Army of Darkness, which was just weird that my aunt and my mom were like, hey, we rented this movie. You want to watch it? And it was the Army of Darkness, which is very weird. But they turn it on and it blew my fucking mind because I'm like, that's that movie me and Jerry rented. This is the next one. What the holy fuck? Where like that whole idea now that now you just look it up, like, oh, Sam Raimi movies, whatever. You just know everything. Where we didn't know anything back then.
No, knowledge came honestly back then because it came because you sought things out. It was work back then. It wasn't like now where, you see a movie with some dude and you're like, oh, this dude looks interesting, so I want to see more movies with or by this guy. Right. And you go online and look up IMDb or go to Wikipedia or something like that and learn everything about that movie, everything surrounding that movie, the whole cast, the production, what it made, what it was worth, so on and so forth. And then everything about that actor, everything they've ever done, everything they'll ever do, including how many children they're going to have and, how many mistresses and, they're going to get fucked in the ass in prison for, a crack cocaine offense or something like that. Like,
and it is too. I mean, I guess it is just with everything. Like, there's just the two sides. Like both sides are good in different ways. Like, I wouldn't want things to go back to that way, I guess, but I still miss it. I'm like, there was something about it that was just kind of better. Because not only did I say with the Evil Dead Army Darkness thing that I didn't know about it, but that's also why I rented Evil Dead 2, was because I didn't know about it and I didn't give a shit. I just wanted to rent a movie, where that doesn't happen to me anymore. I don't watch just whatever for no reason. There's always a reason or a connection or whatever.
The first time I saw Evil Dead 2 was with you.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was funny because that was the day of Misery.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. See, I remember, I think Misery just blocked out every other memory of just so basically just for that story, because I mean, if anyone hasn't seen Misery, I rewatched it a while ago. It's so good, man. That movie is so good. But, it's like the dude, the writer who gets in a car accident and then his creepy super fan is nursing him back to health. And she's she's just creepy as fuck.
Yeah.
And then, so was it that day or was it the next day?
It was actually before we watched Misery. We rented Misery and we watched Evil Dead the same day. And that morning, before we even went out and rented movies, that thing happened where I was like, is he awake? Is he asleep? Because I came over a little bit early and he was still in bed, but his parents kind of had an open door policy. I could go there anytime I wanted, day or night, and it was not an issue. So I'm like, is he awake? He looks like he might be awake. So I'm hanging over him, right over his face, my face over his face kind of thing. And at that point he opens his eyes and he's like, ah.
Yeah, I guess it must have just been that little shift in light or whatever that made me open my eyes. But that is one of the most terrifying ways you can ever wake up, because I didn't have time to register that it's a person that I know or anything. I'm just you just wake up to someone staring at you with their face right there. Yeah, it's just it's nice because now that we're fucking old ass men, there's so few things that I even remember about my dumb life. But man, I'll never forget that moment. It was so scary.
It was a good time. And then we went out and we rented Misery, which none of us had ever seen. It was brand new. And Evil Dead, because the way it worked at the location that we went to, it was that store by your place, right, the convenience store, with the racially insensitive title. We went there, and if you rented a new release, you got an old release free.
Oh, yeah, right.
So we rented Misery, which was brand new on VHS. And we picked Evil Dead 2. Well, you picked Evil Dead 2, and I was like, oh, fuck, whatever, I hadn't seen it, I hadn't heard of it ever, so whatever, I'll watch it, and ended up really liking it. But then when I watched Evil Dead 1, I was like, what the fuck? It's the exact same movie, except, brought up, made a little bit better.
Yeah, that was a weird thing too. A lot of people say Evil Dead 2 is better, I guess because it's funnier or whatever, but I like Evil Dead 1 better. I think even because it's cheaper. I'm so fascinated by crazy cheap movies that they just make for free and they're somehow awesome.
I agree. I prefer Evil Dead 1 to Evil Dead 2. Although, to be very honest, and this I'm probably in the very huge minority here, but I prefer the remake of Evil Dead to all of them.
Yeah, see, that's a weird thing too of the just the weirdness of technology. The only reason I never saw that movie is because me and my old roommate, we downloaded it, but we downloaded this weird copy that like the sound cut out after 20 minutes just to like fuck with people that were trying to steal it.
Synavia.
Yeah, and I just never did it again. I never watched it again. I should though.
It's good. I have it.
I like the idea that they changed Ash into like a girl. It's cool. Man, you know what was a great remake? No, I'm just talking about random shit, but the Hills Have Eyes remake that came out in like mid 2000s. Man, that movie was fucked up. It was so good.
You know what? A lot of people bitch about horror movies being remade, and there are some of them that are really fucking terrible. But honestly, a good 3/4 of them are awesome. Like, I will take the Texas Chainsaw remake from 2003, 2004 any day of the week over the original, because the original is a boring piece of shit. Yes, it blazed trails. It sure did. But as far as I'm concerned, it can blaze that trail right to a toilet, because the remake was way better.
Yeah, and old movies are just rough. Like, I remember I didn't see the first Friday the 13th real late. You know, I saw like 2 through 7 first, and then I saw 1. And yeah, the 1, it's a classic, but yeah, it's not really a Jason movie. And I'm just like waiting for it to finish. I'm just like, come on.
Well, Log Home Video is really cool too, in the respect that they knew I was a big fan of certain things like Friday the 13th and such. So they had original copies of these movies on VHS. So they were like, you know, they were getting worn. People rented these fucking things all the time. So one day they decided they were going to reorder the whole selection. They were going to get 1 through 8 because 9 hadn't been released yet. So they were going to sell the other ones really, really cheap, because, I mean, they were literally a few plays away from the tape snapping anyway. So they gave me, for nothing, because I babysat that demon kid, they gave me parts 1, part 3, part 4, and part 6. And that's how you saw part 4, because I brought it over.
Right. Yeah, I wonder if that might have been the first Jason movie I ever saw, because I really don't remember exactly. But again, it was just like the randomness. Like, I would say I was more of a Friday the 13th fan as a kid than I was Nightmare on Elm Street. But because I just never saw the Nightmare on Elm Streets till later. Like, Jason was there. Nightmare on Elm Street wasn't. So fuck you, Freddy. I'm a Jason man, you know?
The first Nightmare on Elm Street was amazing, and it still is. It still holds up. It's great. And I recently heard someone on a podcast somewhere theorizing, and they were basically like, can you imagine if they had only made the one Nightmare on Elm Street movie and no sequels, none? How iconic, like, I mean, the movie's already iconic, but how revered it would be, much like The Exorcist or something like that, you know, like, because it was true, like, it was scary. It was a scary horror movie. But the rest of them, they cheaped out, and they made it. They were a little bit more comical every time.
Yeah.
But that was a serious horror movie at the time.
Like, you remember? I mean, it was a little lame with like Jason and the Alice Cooper songs. Like, it was okay, but it wasn't great. But Freddy had the Fat Boys or whatever. Like, it just got so lame. It's like there's nobody that can think this is cool anymore. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, I mean, I have all those movies. I mean, I've got all the Friday the 13th, all the Nightmare on Elm Streets. I've got all that stuff in my collection. Which is another thing, too. My movie collection is fucking amazing. I have as many movies on my movie shelf, all on Blu-ray, as a video store might have had on its own.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, this would be, I mean, it's a way better selection than, any of these stores we're talking about had. Man, there's still I can't remember the name of it. This podcast I listened to for a while, though, that was about horror movies that are still only available on VHS, that just never, whoever has the rights or whatever, never gave a shit and never came out in another format. And they're generally shitty movies, but what a weird, like, that's a weird idea, because most stuff, especially now that everything's digital, like, you can't even steal these movies because they're just not there. Like, it's a weird thought.
Well, I mean, eventually they'll get a release, and the reason I say that is because there are all sorts of specialized companies right now, like Vestron and Arrow Video and Scream Factory, which is a subsidiary of Shout Factory, and they specialize in getting movies like horror movies, especially from the '80s and before, and they clean them up, put them on a disc, and sell them for $30 a pop, and they sell them like hotcakes. Like,
Yeah.
even shitty movies like Shocker. Shocker was garbage, and I fucking bought Shocker because Scream Factory put it. It has to be great.
That was like Wes Craven, right? I think I saw that once when I lived in New York, but I was just like really drunk and we're at someone's house, and then like, let's watch Shocker. So I barely remember it, but yeah, didn't seem very good.
It's not good at all. I mean, I think the only reason I'm keeping it even in my collection is because I spent near $30 on the piece of shit, and I'll never get that back. So
Wes Craven had a really weird career. It kind of reminded me of John Carpenter, where it's like it just goes from like super classic, all-time great movies to just like, what the fuck? Like, who would make this movie? What is this shit?
yeah, like Last House on the Left, and then Nightmare on Elm Street, and things like I mean, I wasn't a huge fan, but Serpent and the Rainbow, like stuff like that. People Under the Stairs, I was a big fan of People Under the Stairs. I actually have that as well. Shocker, like it's just such a weird kind of mishmash of horror movies that he was involved with.
That's one thing though I do think is interesting too, that I'm starting, and I mean, I guess I don't know much about it, but it's like kind of the more interesting part to me, I guess, is the money side of things in some ways. Like that Camp Crystal Lake documentary about all the Jason movies, how the one consistent thing is that dude, Frank Mancuso Jr., is that his name?
Yeah.
The producer. And like seeing it from his perspective in some ways is the most interesting to me, because every weird choice and every possible fuck up with Jason or whatever, it all made sense to him, because like he doesn't care so much about that one movie. He just cares about getting to the next movie. And like when you think about it that way, like stuff like Shocker, like I mean, we think of like, oh, Wes Craven, he's this genius, he made all these movies. But from his perspective, he was probably just glad someone would give him money to make another movie, no matter how fucking stupid it was,
Yeah, and I mean, also, I mean, the bottom line is always money for movies. Like, look at It, the recent It, which you haven't seen because you decided to see Blade Runner instead, you stupid idiot.
I would have just stayed at the theater and snuck into it, except Blade Runner was so long I couldn't do it. I'm like, I can't sit through another movie.
So it cost $35 million to make, and probably about the same amount for marketing, which the marketing for this movie was pure genius. They did a bang up job. They didn't think they were going to make their money back, which to me is absurd, because I mean, if anyone's seen the original piece of shit from the 90s, it was so bad. People love it so much, but it's so bad. I bought it and gave it away. That's how bad it was. But they didn't think the Stephen King remake would make any money. But here we are, gone over like what, $700 million? Like, it's just like Deadpool. They fought to have Deadpool made for a decade, and finally the studio was like, here's $54 million. See what you can do with that. Fuck off and leave us alone. And that movie made like,
It's made like $1 billion, right? It was crazy.
It made about $600 or $700 million, something stupid like that worldwide. So, like, R-rated movies make money.
Man, I was just thinking too with like about It, where like I guess one reason why I'm surprised in some ways that Misery holds up so good when I watched it again last year is because Stephen King is one of those dudes that he's like super, super mega famous. And I'm kind of not sure why, because I mean, the books are pretty decent, but the movies, there's so few Stephen King movies that are actually good. It's weird, because in the 80s, everyone is just like, fuck yeah, Stephen King. It's all about Stephen King.
And it's funny, the ones that get revered too, because some of the ones that people talk about that they love are fucking garbage. The Langoliers, fuck off with that shit.
I never saw that.
The Stam miniseries, fuck off with that shit too. The original It.
That's one thing too, where like Silver Bullet, I actually didn't even know that was a movie till you pointed that out to me. And it's like, yeah, maybe it's not the greatest movie ever, but I'd actually say it's one of the better Stephen King adaptations. Like, it's a pretty good movie.
It kills me that this doesn't have a Blu-ray release yet because I want it so fucking bad. Because it's like werewolf movies are either amazing or they're garbage, and I love Silver Bullet. Like, Silver Bullet has a lot of pros to it and very few cons.
It's weird too, like watching. That's where I'm just like so dumb sometimes. Where in the opening credits is Silver Bullet, and it's like, oh, Corey Haim, cool. And then it took me like half an hour of watching the movie before I was like, holy shit, that kid's Corey Haim. Like, even though I read his name, because I was thinking of grown-up Corey Haim, so I didn't put it together.
Yeah, no, the movie was made in like the mid '80s, so I mean, it didn't make a ton of money. But I mean, Stephen King movies do have a pretty good track record if you really think about it. Like, the new It was great. Silver Bullet was great. Apt Pupil is one of the most amazing movies ever.
I guess all of those ones are good. Of that one short story collection that had Shawshank and The Body and Apt Pupil, and then they never made the fourth story. But yeah, those are all good.
But if they had, it would have been great because that was a good story.
I've never read it. I really should.
It's basically about a woman who is hit by a car or something like that, and her body stays alive for a certain point without its head, and it's like an old boys club thing talking about this, how it happened. So it was really interesting. Anyway, you need to check it out.
We should just make the movie of it. We'll just like
yeah, we should. Like, let's get some funding. You know, if we can make it from the couch, that'd be swell.
Yeah, just record it on cell phones, whatever. A blue screen behind this couch. We'll just like make it look like actually, no, this looks close enough. This could be an old boys club.
But I mean, there's also like Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, I mean, that might be my favorite movie. It's so good. So I mean,
it's everyone's favorite fucking movie, really. I mean, except for mine.
Well, that is though. That's why I was like, yeah, I think Shawshank might be my favorite movie. But after a while, I stopped like thinking of it that way. Like, it's the number one movie, or maybe number two after Star Wars on IMDb.
No, it's
like,
number one.
Oh yeah, I mean, it makes sense because it's so good. But that's when I started thinking like, okay, it's great, whatever, fuck that. And then I was like, maybe Heavy Metal's my favorite movie, or maybe Ginger Snaps is my favorite movie. Like, what's my favorite movie that's actually my favorite movie and not everyone's favorite movie?
Yeah. Well, mine is actually Dazed and Confused.
Nice.
And I think it's a solid pick. I mean, you got fucking Batfleck in there. You've got, what's his name? Matthew McConaughey's in there. What's his name? Yeah. Who's that guy? Everyone's in there. The loser dude from Halloween Part 4. Beck's future wife, Marisa Ribisi, is in there. Like, Joey Lauren Adams. Like, it had a pretty good cast.
Yeah, I mean, really, it is weird too. I saw Mallrats first, and I'm like, dude, Kevin Smith stole the whole cast of this movie.
Pretty much.
So yeah, why don't you tell me about how you had the idea to make this book? Because I guess real quick, I'll just tell you on my side of it. So you mentioned like, hey, this is my list of my top 40 horror movies I'm going to talk about, or if not even top, like just 40 interesting horror movies, and you know, write some shit about them. So I tried writing some stuff, and yeah, for me on my end, it was just like, if I try to write serious shit, like I don't know what I'm fucking talking about. So that's where I just started writing weird comedy reviews of them. But what was your like original plan, and what's your side of the book? What are you planning on doing?
Well, I mean, like I had said before, I have a ton of books about movies, and horror movies in particular. However, all these fucking books mention all the same fucking movies all the time. Yes, we know The Exorcist is great. Yes, we know Alien is great, or Aliens. Most people prefer Aliens, but that's because they're stupid. I like Alien. But no one gives any love to, like, Alien 4.
Right.
Like Alien Resurrection. And I think it's a solid movie. Like, I really do. And Alien 3 is an abortion, but that's because, you know, Fox got their hooks into it and fucked with David Fincher and whatever. So basically the idea was I wanted to talk about 40 movies that I really, really love that are horror movies that aren't necessarily the status quo that everyone talks about all the time.
Yeah, and I mean, like, Silver Bullet's a perfect example. Like, I mean, I think it's number 40. It's right at the end, but that I never even heard of it. And that's the first Stephen King book I ever read. It's just weird that I didn't know there was a movie of it. So yeah, I think that's cool to like kind of dig a little deeper into different shit. And it still has some classics. Like whenever I mention to somebody, I'm like, oh yeah, me and my friend Ray were working on this book. The first thing they always say is Monster Squad on the list? And I'm like, yeah, it's on the list. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, Monster Squad is a must, and it's actually going through a kind of a revival of sorts right now because it's the 30th anniversary of that movie, and it's traveling around the U.S. at Alamo Draft Houses, and they're showing it on film, and there's only like a couple copies left of the actual film reel, so it's traveling from place to place and people are seeing this movie. And the guys, or two of the guys rather, from the movie, the guy who played Sean, I don't remember his last name, Sean, anyway, his name's Andre Gower. He's on Twitter and I follow him, and he and the guy who played Rudy, who was the cool kid in the movie, they're both traveling around with it, and they're doing like autograph signings, and they're, you know, they have like merch and stuff like that. Like you can buy the Stephen King Rules t-shirt, you can buy steaks, like they have like steaks like that were in the movie, the rounded ones that looked really cool, and they're Monster Squad branded, and, you know, mini posters and things of that nature. So they're kind of making the rounds. They've probably seen the movie a billion times, but they like still love it, and they actually have a podcast of their own too. And I listened to it for a little while, but honestly, it's pretty hard at times to listen to the guy who plays Rudy, because he gets drunk an awful lot, and, you know, he sounds sloppy, and yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
And man, it is weird now too how like everyone, like almost literally everyone, has a podcast now. Like you just can't keep up with it all.
Yeah, but I mean, as far as the Monster Squad goes, yeah, I had that on the list because I've liked that movie since it came out.
Right.
I saw that movie because my grandparents had a satellite dish, and the summer it came out, it was also put on satellite on HBO. And my grandmother recorded it because she thought I would like it because I like horror movies. And I watched it probably 30 or 40 times that summer, maybe more. And I'm terrible. When I like something, I pimp it on people big time. I'm like, you need this. You need to watch this. You need to listen to this. Like I did it with Marilyn Manson. Like I pimped Marilyn Manson out on people before he was popular.
Yeah.
I pimped, you know, certain horror movies out on people before they were, you know, popular or out or whatever. And so I'm not going like, oh, I'm such a trendsetter. But, you know, being a fan of this movie for 30 years, I mean, I'm 40. Right. So I've been a fan of this movie since, you know, I was 10 years old.
And that totally does tie into also like what we were talking about before about just a different world. Like to just have something, it's almost like weirdly magical. Like that's just such a weird little story of like that your grandma just happened to film this movie that maybe you would like. Like that's like a meteor hitting the earth. Like what are the chances that you got to see this movie and then you see it and you're like, this is the fucking coolest movie.
Well, I remember the VHS tape very clearly because she had also recorded on it Universal Soldier, which was new at the time. That Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren movie where they were like reanimated soldiers, and a movie called Stay Tuned that had John Ritter in it, and it was basically a comedy about these people traveling through channels of TV. Like it was weird. So
Never heard of that one.
it was actually it's fun. You know, they go through stations and then they're in the shows and stuff like that. It's neat. Or it was at the time anyway. I mean, might not hold up now, but you know, the Monster Squad sure does. I mean, and there's only 2 versions of that available on Blu-ray right now. There is the 20 or 25th anniversary edition, which has tons of special features and is amazing. And then there's the olive version that has no special features, which is the one I have.
And though it's so nice too when something holds up from when you were a kid, because when you're a kid, I mean, it's so much easier to like stuff and then to grow up and to realize that someone actually cared when they made it. Because like another random movie I saw at Terry's house that we just caught on TV was Rock and Roll High School Forever, the sequel with Corey Feldman in it. And it came out like early 90s, and we thought it was so funny. We just laughed and laughed. And I just rewatched it last month. And it's just like, like, I don't even see where they were trying to make it funny. I have no idea why I liked it because it's really bad. And
Who was the band in it?
it was just Corey Feldman's band.
Oh, fuck that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, Ramones, who are like probably my favorite band. The Ramones were in the first one, and then they segue that, or put a sequel out with Corey Feldman's band.
And like watching it again, I can understand why I thought Corey Feldman was cool because I was like 12 or whatever, 13, and he was like, this was like when he was dressing like Michael Jackson and he smoked and he seemed so cool. But man, yeah, it's just shitty. Oh, there was one part where they had to do a drug test, so they hide or like apple juice containers, and some other guy is standing next to them. So they pour the apple juice in, and then they like taste their urine sample thing, and they're like, "That's not my pee. Is this your pee?" "Oh yeah, sorry." And then they switch pee. I mean, I guess that's sort of funny, but I think that's honestly the only joke in the whole movie.
Well, Feldman at the time, I mean, the '80s were definitely his heyday. I mean, he was in Friday the 13th Part 4, which was a huge deal. He was in Friday the 13th Part 5 for a moment. He was in The Lost Boys.
And
like
the Goonies too, wasn't he in Goonies?
Yeah, he was in the Goonies. He was in the Goonies.
He was killing it in the 80s.
I mean, I always tell people, like, if you like the Goonies, go watch the Monster Squad instead because it's fucking better.
But yeah, it's better sometimes. Like, I wish I never watched some of these things from when I was a kid because it's just like so sad. But yeah, but when they hold up, it's just great. It's just good shit. And I also like the way you said, like, you super get into stuff. Like, I kind of feel like that too. Like, I would rather rewatch something that I like instead of watch something new that I probably won't remember.
Well, I mean, and it's like you were saying about the internet. Like, everything's out there. Like, you can see anything you want, really. I mean, especially living in Canada where you're not prosecuted for downloading stuff off the internet. I mean, if you don't want to buy a collection, you don't have to buy a collection. I buy a collection because I love looking at this shelf. Like, I mean, half this stuff I don't get back to watching, but just being able to see this shelf full of cool stuff that I know that I've loved at some point or other. I mean, yeah, there's a couple of stinkers in there, but everyone likes something that's crappy. I mean, look at my last marriage.
I was going to take it to Hellraiser 4, but if you want to go with the marriage, we'll talk about Hellraiser 4 in the future, though.
I do love Hellraiser 4. Hellraiser 4 is good. I mean, the first 4 movies in the Hellraiser series are amazing. Everything after that is kind of like, why?
Yeah, so that's one thing we'll see where it goes in the future. But yeah, just because like it's so hard to promote stuff or to stand out or whatever. So theoretically, we finish this book. That is kind of, I guess, the next plan is to do podcasts about each movie, because that seems like a good way for people to find stuff through a podcast or put them on YouTube or whatever.
Or maybe even before. I mean, maybe even before, because I think that if we do a podcast about each individual movie, I mean...
Yeah, that's a lot of... Sure, it's going to take a while to get through all those.
I mean, you know, by the time we're done, we should hopefully have this book completed.
Yeah.
And especially considering how I kind of have it figured out that we're going to do this. Because, I mean, I'm really liking your comedic reviews, like I had said before. Like, I laugh every time I read them. And it's genuinely funny because I can picture your reactions, having known you for as long as I have. So... you know, you coming in with your review and me describing the technical stuff about the movie, like the budget, who's in it, the history surrounding the production, so on and so forth, and maybe some trivia or something like that, and maybe even how I discovered said movie, and then having the funny review alongside of it. I think it'll fill out really nicely, and I think it'll be a far longer book than I had anticipated, because I was kind of figuring it would be about a 15-page deal per movie, but I don't think it's going to be a 15-page deal per movie.
Yeah, at this point. I'm trying to, I don't know, with mine, they started off real long and they're getting shorter, but yeah, I think it could be interesting, because like Hellraiser is a good example, because like I guess I'm like, where you've got the information about the movie, I'm sort of trying to go in stupid in a way. So like with Hellraiser Bloodlines, like I just, you know, it's I'm almost done that one. I'll send it to you soon. But it's like, because I just remember being confused a lot. I'm like, is this chick on Pinhead's side or is she not? How is this building? Is this gonna like? There's just so much I didn't understand, and then to find out later, because I looked up a little bit about like the weird production problems and that the director pulled his name off because the studio re-edited it, and like that all makes sense. Like no wonder I didn't know what the fuck was going on.
Kevin Yeager was the director, if I remember correctly, and he had been a special effects person for years in Hollywood for horror movies and things of that nature. And basically, the studio came in and they're like, "Oh, this isn't looking like we want. Where's Pinhead?" And he was like, "This isn't about Pinhead. Like the Hellraiser is not only about Pinhead. Like there has to be an origin somewhere, and this is what I'm doing. Like it starts here." And he wasn't gonna have that future stuff at the end, like with the spaceship and stuff like that. The studio ended up making it going that way. So while I don't mind it particularly, like I like that movie a lot, it was going to be an entirely different movie. It was going to be longer, and it was going to be like a 2 hour long movie, and the studio was like, no, like it's got to be like an hour and a half, and there's got to be Pinhead throughout it, and there's got to be this and there's got to be that. And finally he was like, you know what, fuck you guys, I'm out.
That is what it is weird too, just about movies in general, that it's like hands down the most expensive. I guess video games are creeping up on it, but basically the most expensive art form. But in some ways, also the simplest one. Because, like, as a money man, if you're just like a producer who doesn't care about anything, all these choices make sense. It's like, yeah, of course you would tell him to put Pinhead in because that's all you know about Hellraiser, and you think that's all anybody knows about Hellraiser. Like, you can understand why these people make these dumb decisions, but it does just lead to, like, shallowness and like weird crappy stuff.
But I mean, the thing is, look at something like Friday the 13th. I think the first one had like $1 million budget, maybe even less, and that movie made like $15 million or something stupid like that. So it made 15 times what it cost to make the movie. The sequels, they cost anywhere from like $2 million to like $4 or $5 million to make each movie. But all of those movies had like $20-30 million returns. That's a huge profit. But nowadays, if a movie movies are ridiculous. Superhero movies are costing, anywhere from $150 million to $250 million to make one fucking movie. And in return, they want $1 billion.
Yeah.
Sadly, they get it most times. But if it doesn't make that, it's kind of like, a bank. Like, for instance, banks here in Canada, last year, one of the banks in Canada laid off 4% of its work staff because instead of the $12 billion with a B in profit they had projected that they were going to make, they only made $9 billion in profit. So they were like all worried, oh fuck, what are we gonna do? So let's get rid of people. So it's kind of like that with the movie industry. Like they want to make, like, they don't mind putting out money if they know they're gonna make the money. That's fine.
That's one thing too with like superhero movies in particular. I mean, it has been a good age for them in general. They're good, and mostly I like them. But it's very noticeable that like every superhero movie, like the final third, the third act, it's always identical every time. And it's never going to be different because they're scared. They're like, we got to make sure that people like this and people show up. And yeah, it's like gotten to be so predictable where you have like a cool origin and a nice setup and a good middle of the movie. And then just a big fight at the end that's just so boring. And it's just like, oh, well, okay, another one of these, I guess.
Well, I was totally pissed when I first saw Captain America Civil War, because Captain America Civil War, I mean, there was Marvel Civil War back in the mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006, something like that. And at the end of that, Spider-Man outs himself and Captain America is assassinated by the Punisher. So I'm like, this is great. Punisher, fucking Captain America is gonna die. Of course, that didn't happen because Captain America makes money, Marvel, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, these movies make so much money, it's stupid. Like, the Marvel movies have made a collective, I think, $18 billion. Like, that's Disney money, too. Like, Disney gets this money, just like they do for Star Wars. They own Star Wars, they get Star Wars money. But there's very little love given to horror movies. They don't want to bank on them. They don't think they'll make their money, even though lately horror movies have been making good fucking money.
Yeah, wasn't Get Out the most profitable movie of this year? Like, just based on like how little it cost to make, and like because it was another like $1.5 million movie that made like $50 million. It's like, holy fuck.
It cost them $4 million to make that. Okay. It cost them $4 million to make that, and it made like hundreds of millions of dollars. It basically gave Jordan Peele a blank check for whatever else he wants to do, because he helped write that movie, he directed that movie, and he also was a producer on that movie, so he gets all that money. Like,
that's, I guess, one thing that it is nice with the horror industry is that it's like it is at least a little more limber and creative. Like, instead of just a cookie cutter whatever action movie, because it's cheap. Like, I guess I started noticing like about 10 years ago with like Paranormal Activity. Like, it wasn't my favorite movie, but I'm like, well, whatever, it was neat. And it does seem like that kind of kicked off like I guess, what's that company that does Insidious and all that stuff? Blumhouse or whatever? Yeah, where it's like, hey, okay, we'll spend $1 million or $2 million, but you can do weird shit and you can try stuff, and like it is kind of cool.
Blumhouse has been very, very integral. Is that how you say that word? Integral, yeah, integral, in the resurfacing of horror, or horror becoming more viable to make. People are becoming less scared of taking chances on horror movies. So now, I mean, yes, there is another fucking Saw movie coming out, but also this year we've got, like in the last year, we got Get Out, which, I mean, it was good. I liked that movie. It was fun. I liked the ending of it. It was pretty good. But there was also, It. They didn't want to take the chance on it almost. Like, well, they did, but they didn't. Basically, they made this movie and they didn't have any solid plans to make the second half of the story, because they're like, oh, we have to see how it does. I'm like, are you on fucking dope? This is going to make a ton of money.
Yeah, that does seem weird. That, yeah, they're just like, oh, who knows? Not sure.
And I'm looking forward to it. I mean, it starts production, I guess, this spring. It'll be fun. It was good. The first half of the movie, I don't call it a part, because it's not a part. It's half of the movie. Just like, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, separated into two movies.
I do remember, though, with the old It, that the first half was way better in my memory. I haven't seen it since I was a kid, but like the half with the kids I thought was really cool. And then because it was like 2 VHS tapes, then you put in tape 2 with the grown-ups, and I'm like, oh, just fuck off, grown-ups. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, and these kids, I mean, you haven't seen it yet, but these kids are exceptional. Like, they had the Wolfhard kid from Stranger Things who lit the screen up. He was so profane. It was amazing. Like, he was the trash mouth, Richie Tozier, I believe is his character's name. And vulgar. All he talks about is fucking people's moms and, this and that. But he does it with style. It's so great. Every kid that they had in this movie is what I kind of pictured in my head, minus, I guess, the styles of clothing, because in the movie the kids were based out of the 50s. Oh, yeah. And then the second half of the book, I guess, was like 27 years later, so it would have been the 80s at that point, and they all looked gay. Which I have no problem with. Gay people, do your thing.
But yeah, sometimes people look gay. That's just how it is.
Yeah, you look great. But anyway, yeah, there was a chance that they were kind of maybe not gonna make the second half of It. And now, of course, now that the movie has made like a substantial amount of money in return, like the movie cost, including marketing, about $70 million, and it has made hundreds of millions of dollars. So safe to say we're getting our second half.
Man, though, it really must be stressful. I mean, I'd hate to be like a producer, money man type person, because it must just be so awful. Because like you can kind of take it for granted when things work out, but then when they don't, like, I never watched it, but that John Carter movie from 2 or 3 years ago, it cost like $100 million and nobody went to see it. Like, Holy shit. You must feel like such an asshole.
That was stupidity on the studio's part. Who the fuck tries to put out a movie like that the same time that they're putting the Avengers out?
Right.
You're dumb. Like, why would you do that? Why would you try and put this shitty movie out with the actor that no one gives a shit about against the Hulk?
Yeah.
Like, why? Why are you going to do that? That's just not intelligent at all.
I was just going to say, and this is jumping back a bit, but about the idea of now we can potentially know everything, and back in the day we didn't know anything. And I'm kind of like trying to get back into that when I can. Like it's neat going through so far of your list. I'm going through the movies I haven't seen first, and then I'll get to the ones I have seen. But it's kind of cool just to turn on a movie and to not know anything, to not know what's going on. And I think the last time that happened to me in a movie theater was it was with that movie It Follows, because my friend Craig was just going to see it. And I don't know, I was just doing nothing. And he's like, hey, I'm going to this movie. You want to go? And I never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it. And I mean, it wasn't like an amazing movie, but it was pretty good. It was like above average. And to not know anything about it was such a cool feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess like I feel like if you could market that idea, but it's like counter marketing, because like the only way to market something is to tell people what it's going to be. You can't market it that they don't know what it's going to be. That's insane. But
do you remember back when we were kids seeing a movie trailer? And a movie trailer was about 20 seconds long. It was basically a little bit of music, a catch line, and the title. That's what a trailer was. I mean, maybe a still shot or a couple little shots here and there, but it was a lot of words and not very much of what was actually going to happen. Nowadays, you can almost get the entire story out of a trailer, because there are trailers, usually trailers are about 1.5 minutes long each, upwards of 5 minutes.
And I actually read an article about this, that they did some weird market research where they found that you'd think that giving away everything in the trailer would be a bad thing, but like marketing people have found that movies do better when the trailer does give away all the major parts. I guess just because like then people like they feel more secure about going, because like they're like, I totally know I'm gonna like this movie because I already know every fucking thing that's gonna happen. It's just weird.
It just doesn't make any sense to me. I'd rather go in blind, to be honest. However, with it, I went and I bought the Blu-ray of the original movie, and I bought the book because I hadn't read the book.
I was going to say, yeah, you did as much research as possible.
But that's me. That's what I do. So I read the book. Took me about 4 days, and that's not like power reading. That's just how I read. I soaked up all the information, and then I put on the fucking Blu-ray, and god damn, what a piece of shit.
The only thing I do remember, I mean, I haven't seen it in a long time, but Bridget from Ginger Snaps, the younger sister, is in it, right? And I mean, she's always good. Was she good when she was a kid, or did she suck too?
She could only do what she was told. Right. So much like Seth Green, I'm a fan of Seth Green. Seth Green sucked in that movie. So did she. They all
Seth
sucked.
Green was in that? I didn't remember that at all.
Yeah. He was the younger version of one of the fucking characters. Anyway, it was bad.
Did you see, speaking of Stephen King shit, did you see The Dark Tower? Because it got bad reviews, but I never went.
I did not, because I didn't like the book, so...
Yeah, the book was like, that's where I was wondering about it, because like people are like, man, this thing is incoherent and makes no sense. But especially the first book of Dark Tower was incoherent and made no sense. So I mean, what do you fucking expect?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I didn't want to give it a chance, because I mean, I'm not enough of a fan of Idris Elba to go to a movie based on just his name, because I mean, really, he's really hit or miss. Yes, he's in the Thor movies, and I like the Thor movies just fine. He was in Pacific Rim. He was okay in Pacific Rim. He was also in this show that everyone said was so great, and I can't remember the name of it, but it sucked. I didn't like it, so I stopped watching it. So I won't go to a movie based on him. And Matthew McConaughey, I find, is making some weird choices in the last few years. I mean, he won that Oscar, so now he pretty much makes the top dollar when he goes and signs on for something. So when they approached him for The Dark Tower, I don't know what they thought they were going to do, but I'm just not sold on it, so I'm not going to see it. Like, It's
Yeah.
as easy as that. I'd like to see an updated version of Silver Bullet.
Yeah.
I'd like to see an updated version of Salem's Lot.
And isn't there, I haven't checked up on it lately, but they were making The Stand, but it was the guy who directed The Fault in Our Stars, which just seemed like the wrong choice. But I guess that movie made so much money that they asked him what he wanted to do. And he's like, I want to make The Stand. But then I haven't heard about it since, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
But that'd be cool because we could use a new Stand for sure because that was a cool book. And yeah, the old one had fucking Parker Lewis Can't Lose in it. So Molly Ringwald, it could use some updating.
Yeah, old Molly Ringwald. I just read something about her today. I don't remember what it was, though. I do like John Hughes movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He never made a horror film. That'd be great. We should make a movie about bringing back John Hughes from the grave so he could direct a horror movie. That's some meta shit.
You know what? Someone wrote something like that not too long ago. Like,
Really?
yeah, we should bring John Hughes back so he can do this or that.
Man, that's always like, no matter what idea you have, it's like if you don't do it immediately, 40 other fucking dickheads already did it.
Did you see that I replied to or sent you a thing on Twitter?
Yeah. So I had the idea to do the Scott Pilgrim 1 minute at a time. But even that, I looked that up, and of course some Star Wars people are doing that because of course they are. Everything is Star Wars first. But yeah, what movie was it that they're doing?
The Lost Boys.
Right, man, that's a weird choice, but that's cool.
Yeah, I love The Lost Boys. Stylistically, it was so great. And it's so hard to believe it's a Joel Schumacher movie because Joel Schumacher fucking sucks.
I wonder what's going to happen, though, if they're going through that movie 1 minute at a time. I want to hear the episode about the sax man. Just see if they
Tim Capello. Yeah, Tim Capello.
just see if they could talk about him for whatever, 40 minutes. But anyway, I feel like that's probably a pretty good, whatever, ramble podcast, just to do a podcast for no reason. Try it out.
Yeah, I'm good with it. I mean, having known one another for 20 some odd years, 25, 26 years or whatever the fuck it is, we could probably sit and bullshit for 5-6 hours, but this is a pretty good start. And I mean, we covered it. We covered horror movies. We covered porn. you know?
And this will be a thing, too, when you hear it back. I mean, I got used to it after a while, but it is that thing everyone always says of like they don't like how their voice sounds or whatever. And it is always weird when you first hear yourself. You're like, really? Is that exactly what I sound like? But all right. But, you just get used to it.
My Xbox just turned on its own.
Oh, shit. Do you have the Kinect? Is it watching us?
No. No, I don't have that.
So it's okay that our dicks are out right now?
Well, it was until you took your mouth off.
That'd be a good, sign off. So I guess theoretically then, if we do another one, it'll be like a real podcast. We start doing the, commentaries or whatever.
Well, we can do... I figure we'll do it one of two ways. We'll either throw the movie on in the background and just talk about it as it goes, or we kind of talk about it analytically like we would in the book, which kind of doesn't make sense. I think the way to go is definitely throw the movie on and just talk through it while it goes. Like, turn it on with the sound on low and kind of do that thing. And as an aside, I think I asked you this before, but I don't remember. How many of the movies out of the 40 movies I proposed have you not seen?
It's about half. I don't remember exactly, but roughly half of them. But even of those half, there's half, I haven't seen 20 of them. And then 10 of them I haven't seen in so long, I almost don't remember them. And then 10, I'm like, oh, I know those movies.
Yeah, okay.
So a pretty good ratio, little mix. Which I think is probably a good sign, too, of that it is not just a standard list or whatever. That it is somewhat unusual stuff.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? I'm almost thinking about changing some of it as we go, depending, because I mean I've got some new movies since that I haven't even seen. So I just recently picked up the newly released 976 Evil, which I've never seen. So maybe we could just throw a couple of movies on at the end, and maybe watch them fresh together and kind of do that, because that would be interesting.
Yeah, we could always do too, just podcasts that aren't necessarily stuff from the list, or just start planning on volume 2. There is stuff that I'm curious too. The one movie that just came to mind for me, especially with the Hellraiser thing, was Event Horizon. Like, I definitely would be interested to see if you liked that movie, because it came out around the same time. It came out like 97, so a little bit later. And it is kind of like Hellraiser in space, because it's like a space movie, but they do their like wormhole, whatever shit to travel. But the way the wormhole works is basically the shortcut is to go through hell. So they do it one time as a test, and then on the other end, everyone is dead and crazy. And they're like, well, what the fuck happened to those guys? And like, it's really cool. It's a really cool movie.
I haven't seen it, so I think I'm going to check it out. I don't think it's on Blu-ray, though. I don't think it has a release, so I won't be able to buy it. But
and it's like, it's one of those movies, like it's a B movie. I think it was directed by the guy that does all those Resident Evil movies now. But it's like a B plus, you know? It's like, it's a good B movie, but it's definitely not an A movie.
Yeah. No, I'm down to check that out for sure. And I mean, I'll do my best to keep 976 Evil fresh, because I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen that. I haven't even watched the new Chucky movie yet since I bought it. I don't know if it's because I'm a little bit pissed that it got released on Netflix the same day I shelled out for it, or what, but I haven't watched it yet. But I read the plot on Wikipedia, and it's an amazing plot. Yeah. Like, I actually can't wait to watch it. I just don't know why I haven't.
I'm not even sure if I'm caught up on. I might be like a movie behind. I used to love those Child's Play movies so much. Like, I had the novelization of Child's Play 3, which I mean, I think was better than the movie. I was into that book. It was cool.
I think I gave that book to you.
Yeah, I mean, how else would we both have it? Yeah, like, we both just happen to have it.
Yeah. But I mean, I had Curse of Chucky, and then I bought the box set, which had Curse of Chucky in it as well. So
is that like the 5th one?
That would be the 6th.
Yeah, I'm definitely behind then. I think I only saw up to Bride of Chucky.
There's Child's Play 2, Child's Play 3, Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, Curse of Chucky, and now Cult of Chucky.
Yeah, so I'm literally 3 movies behind, man. Shameful. I used to love so much too when I was.
Seed?
No.
I've heard it's like, I haven't seen it all the way through either. It's one of those so bad movies, but I think I'd like to give it a rewatch. So
I used to think it was so genius too. I mean, again, when I was just a dumb teenager and I thought dumb shit was genius, but I'm still that. I still think that where, like, the idea of Child's Play 2, where he's been in the doll for too long and is becoming like he's gonna be stuck there. So that part at the end when his hand gets caught in the grate and he has to pull it off, but he's starting to be like flesh and blood and not just a doll. So it's like super gross. And then he jabs that knife into his stump and tapes it on. And I'm just like, this is the best movie I've ever seen.
I forgot all about that. Yeah, that's awesome.
It's insane because, like, you know, it hurts him to do this, but yeah, he's got like a knife for some reason with no hilt, and he jams it in his own fucking missing hand and tapes it on. It's just like, dude. And then they just like melt them. Oh yeah, it's awesome.
We just watched the first one, my fiance and I. We just watched the first one, just, you know, because she's trying to watch a horror movie every day for October. And I was like, well, you haven't seen any of these movies, so let's watch that. So we watched the first one, and it holds up really well, actually. Like, it really does.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like on the surface kind of silly, but it's totally scary. It's like, fuck.
I mean, you know, reanimated fucking doll, you know, with the soul of a serial killer. I mean, it's got everything I love. It's a horror movie and it's about a serial killer, kind of.
And I always remembered that line of just like, Andy, I thought we were friends to the end. This is the end, friend. Like that little kid trying to be all tough.
Yeah, he's like a cold motherfucker just for a second there. This is the end, friend. Little bastard. It would have been great if Chucky had got him.
Well, that's like, I remember, just mostly keeps us rolling a little longer, but like I told you the idea that I had for that movie Boxing Helena, that was just like a bad, silly art movie about a chick who gets her arms and legs cut off, but it turns out it's all a dream. It was a piece of shit. It was David Lynch's daughter directed it. So I was like, what if you did that for real? Like, what if you made that movie where a guy traps a chick in his house and cuts off her arms and legs and she has to escape, and your note was like, he should just kill her, he should just strangle her and drown her. Just like, what the fuck? Like, can you imagine how depressing that would be if people went to this movie and like this woman goes through this horrible ordeal of getting all her limbs cut off, and she struggles and struggles for a whole movie, and then he just kills her.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, that's how I roll. So
I mean, that is what would happen. So I mean,
well, I mean, realistically, if he's gonna cut his arms and legs off of this woman, you know, the next step is very obvious to me. I mean,
yeah.
You cut her head off.
Yeah. I guess I'll let you probably save a lot of time. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess to be fair, it did kind of make me rethink it a little. I'm like, maybe, yeah, like why wouldn't he just kill her? Like I gotta come up with some reason.
Yeah, I remember that movie. I saw that movie actually on the Movie Network, and it was only years later that I read that Kim Basinger was supposed to be in that movie, and because of all the nudity in it, she opted out of it, but she had already signed the contract for it, so because she refused to show up on set, they ended up suing her for like, I think $2 million or $12 million or something like that.
I only watched it because the Misfits have a song about it, just called Helena, and I'm like, oh, I should just watch this, whatever. And
Really?
yeah, it's like the Corey Graves Misfits,
Oh,
the
okay.
later Misfits, and yeah, and I was just like, just so lame. Like there's literally nothing lamer than the "It Was All a Dream." Like, get the fuck out of here. It would have been lame anyway, but I was just like, what a piece of shit movie.
Would have been even better if the movie had ended and, it was like that whole "it's just a dream" thing. But then she wakes up and that dude is strangling her to death as she's waking up.
Yeah. Now, in this case, like, I'm with you on that one because it would just be so unexpected and weird. Like, that would be great.
Like she wakes up all refreshed and shit, and then all of a sudden, blah.
Well, all right then. I guess we're gonna need like a name. Oh, well, okay. I'll ask you that before we go. Did you have an idea for the book title or anything? Just 40.
I haven't gotten that far yet in regards to the actual title. I'm more focused on what's inside. So maybe what's inside. I don't know.
So then I guess this podcast will just have to be Ray and Keith's Dutch Rudder. Dutch Rudder Fun Time Hour.
Until something else comes up, or Docker Hour, or, Felching Fun Time.
Yeah,
or,
Felching on down the road.
Yeah.
Podcast.
By the way, I'm glad Gord Downey died. That's all I have to say.
Cheers. I'll probably cut that.